Will it be different this time? By article by Berk, Gümüs, August 24, 2022.
The current world situation is becoming more and more critical, and the probability of nuclear war is increasing, but it is not too late to grasp the sword of Damocles that hangs over the world and to avert the danger. Every single person can help to keep the peace on Earth, even if he feels so small and insignificant. The world has been saved from total nuclear destruction a few times, because of just one person. And exactly about these heroes of peace is to be reported now.
Stanislaw Geographowicz Petrov.
On September 26, 1983, the world was on the brink of nuclear war. A satellite reported the approach of American missiles to the command center of the Soviet Missile Early Warning System. But Russian Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov kept his cool and decided it was a false report, saving the world from an imminent, all-destructive nuclear world war. Stanislav Petrov was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense. On September 26, 1983, Petrov was on night duty at Serpukhov 15, a Soviet air defense base, just under 100 kilometers south of Moscow. Colonel Petrov worked with the for that time very advanced early warning system OKO. Altogether 9 OKO satellites circled round the Earth and monitored the American airspace. Special attention was paid to the military bases in the United States of America, which were equipped with 6 nuclear weapons. With the new technology, it was not only possible to detect an enemy missile launch, but also to determine the flight path and thus the target. Shortly after midnight, satellite Cosmos 1382 reported a hostile missile launch from a United States military station in the state of Montana. The early warning system sirens wail. A nuclear missile headed directly for the Soviet Union has been detonated. But instead of panicking and immediately reporting the attack to the Kremlin, Colonel Petrov remained calm and waited patiently. The Americans would not attack with a single missile that made absolutely no sense. Only 2 minutes later, therefore, he reported the incident as a false alarm. With it, Petrov risked a hostile attack of the Americans. If the warning of the satellite should prove nevertheless as correct, the Soviet Union would have now no chance more to defend itself. An American nuclear attack was not exactly improbable at this time. Only a few days before, a Korean passenger plane was shot down in Soviet airspace. All 269 passengers were killed. The outcry from the American public was enormous, and the situation came to a head. All this made the Kremlin uneasy. Only 5 minutes later the siren wailed again. This time the monitor of Petrov located 4 more enemy missile launches. The instruments seemed to be working properly, and the systems clearly show a total of 5 missiles are on a direct course toward the Soviet Union. Petrov's mind races. Should he report the incident to his superiors? That would be his duty, after all, and they would have to decide on a potential counterattack within just a few minutes. But would the United States of America really attack with only 5 missiles? And from a single base, an attack with hundreds of missiles from different, closer stations would be strategically much wiser. The early warning system is advanced, but still flawed here and there. Petrov has to make a decision quickly, and he is running out of time. If he makes the wrong decision, he will be put in one of the horrible gulags without a trial. Nevertheless, Petrov reports another false alarm to the Kremlin. And then he waited for 17 minutes. Probably the longest 17 minutes of his life. In the end he was right, as it turned out later. The alarms were triggered by solar reflections. To save the face of the Soviet Union, the incident was kept strictly secret. After all, the surveillance system was unique in the world and could not have any flaws. Petrov was even warned off for the evening for not keeping his logbook sensibly. In a 1998 German newspaper article, Petrov said the following.
I trusted my experience and feeling at that time, not the computers. After that I drank half a liter of vodka and slept for 28 hours. A lot of officers, including me, had to quit the service. It makes me sad to think about how I was treated.
On May 19, 2017, Petrov died in a small town near Moscow. The events of that night did not become public until 10 years later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not even Petrov's wife and children knew about it.
537th contact Saturday, 3rd March 2012, 2:32 p.m.
What we have never talked about officially but only privately is the fact that in 1984, as I wrote in a prophecy, there was a threat of a third world war, but it could be prevented by the common sense of those less responsible. But the whole thing happened in the autumn of 1983, a few months before 1984.
That is correct, because a corresponding coincidence occurred.
The matter had not become public, so I would like to mention it today, and I would ask you to correct me if necessary. So the first threat, which almost led to a third world war, took place in the autumn of 1983, the reason being a natural phenomenon. It was then that a Soviet spy satellite recorded an event that was misinterpreted by the Soviet military and the Soviet government. The satellite recorded a flash of lightning when the clouds broke up and the sun flashed through. This was misinterpreted by the Soviets as a US nuclear missile launch, which very quickly led to counterattack measures being considered, also with nuclear missiles. It was only thanks to the common sense and prudence of a Soviet officer whose name I cannot remember that common sense prevailed in the end, and that it was weighted and clarified that it was a false alarm from the satellite, which had registered only one flash of sunlight. However, it really did narrowly miss a worldwide catastrophe of a third world war, but this was kept from the world public.
The name of the prudent Soviet officer was Stanislav Petrov.
Correct, since you say the name, I remember. There was a second 1 week after the case, which could have almost led to a third world war as well. The reason was the massacre in Berk in Lebanon at the time, when a murderous attack cost many human lives, which led the US to carry out larger-scale maneuvers that caused the Soviets to sound a false alarm on another occasion and put the Soviet army on alert, which was already considering a counterstrike. Here too, however, common sense and relevant clarifications triumphed once again, which prevented the Soviets from attacking and prevented a third world war. This fact too, which we were talking about at the time, was then concealed from the world public.
Like many other incidents in many ways.
Vasily Arkhipov.
In the Cuban Missile Crisis October 1962, Vasily Arkhipov refused to agree to the launch of a nuclear torpedo. Thus he prevented a third world war and thus a nuclear apocalypse. The United States of America and the Soviet Union, two superpowers with enough weapons to destroy the world 20 times, bring themselves in position. They had the nuclear weapons ready to hand. One spark would have been enough. The world holds its breath as 4 Soviet nuclear submarines armed to the teeth set course for Cuba. pursued by the U.S. Atlantic Fleet. In these few days, the survival of the world as we know it depends on the decisions of individuals under great pressure. A secret naval base in the Arctic Circle. 4 Soviet submarines are being prepared for a mission known only to a handful of Communist Party officials. No one knows where the journey is going. Their orders, the reason for their deployment and the schedule are in an envelope that must not be opened until after they have sailed. The commander of 59, one of the submarines, is Valentin Sawisk. Only when he opens the envelope do the troops learn the objective of the mission. One of the few who know the goal of the mission in advance is the captain of the fleet, Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov. He also makes the trip aboard 59. He was a modest and reserved person, intelligent and very friendly. A kind and calm character. In the autumn of 1962, the relations between Moscow and Washington as good as collapsed. The Communist East and the capitalist West go on a direct confrontation course. People in the Washington suburbs built shelters in their backyards and filled them with canned goods. School children were taught to take cover under desks. Since 1959, the United States has deployed medium-range missiles in Turkey and Italy capable of reaching and destroying Moscow within 16 minutes. The revolution in Cuba further heats up the mood. With Fidel Castro's assumption of power, a Soviet-friendly regime is now in the immediate vicinity of the United States of America. During 1962, the Soviets smuggled 42 medium-range nuclear-tipped missiles into Cuba on merchant ships. You have your missiles in Turkey, we have ours in Cuba, so went the game. By stationing the weapons in Cuba, the Soviets are now able to destroy Los Angeles, Washington and New York within 30 minutes. But that's not all. The next step in the Soviet plan to arm Cuba was to send the 4 submarines from Sagda Bay. What few on board know, each of the submarines carries a top-secret cargo. The special cargo in each of the 4 submarines is a nuclear torpedo of enormous explosive power. These weapons have the same power as the Hiroshima atomic bombs. The commanders of the 4 submarines are authorized to act without direct orders from Moscow. There are strict safety rules in each submarine. The torpedo can be fired only if the captain and the political officer agree. Each carries 1/2 of a key. Only in combination can the firing mechanism be unlocked. Then a signal is sent to the torpedo bay. But aboard submarine 59 there is an exception. In this operation, Fleet Commander Vasily Arkhipov has a veto. Only when all 3 men agree can they unlock Armageddon. The security of the world is only guaranteed by the so-called balance of terror. A pact of mutual deterrence with which the United States of America and the USSR keep each other in check. A single-fired nuclear torpedo would be enough to cause a destructive domino by the reaction of the Americans to set in motion a destructive domino effect. 50 nautical miles from port, the commanders of the 4 submarines are to read their orders. Their mission takes them out of the safety of the Barents Sea past Scandinavia and Ireland, thousands of miles from the North Atlantic to the Caribbean, where they are to support Soviet forces in Cuba, only about 180 kilometers from the American mainland. These 4 submarines are to spearhead the Soviet forces, which is to make Cuba one of the most highly armed places in the world. 2 weeks after their departure, the 4 submarines have already reached the middle of the Atlantic Ocean without incident. They have made it halfway to Cuba undetected and without rousing the suspicion of the Americans. For the first time, the United States has concrete evidence of Soviet missiles being smuggled into Cuba, right on its doorstep. On October 14, 1962, the weather changes as Hurricane Ella moves in. It is the most severe storm of the season. On board, of course, such extreme weather conditions are anything but easy. In Moscow, however, there is radio silence. No one knows that secret negotiations have begun at the highest level. The 4 submarines are not informed about it. It is as if they had been forgotten. Then, on October 15, the Naval Command reports. It seems that Moscow wants a radical change of course. 2 weeks after leaving their home port, the 4 submarines receive orders not to head directly for Cuba, but to cruise in the Sargasso Sea and wait for further instructions. More time at sea and a higher risk of being discovered by the Americans. Thousands of miles away, Kennedy decides to inform the nation of the discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba. Kennedy makes it clear in his speech that Cuba is to be quarantined immediately. The president draws a clear red line round Cuba and the Caribbean. Thus it is to be prevented that further Soviet weapon material can be supplied. The news that the USSR has smuggled nuclear weapons to Cuba occupies the American nations, but in the Soviet Union nothing is reported about the events. Life there goes on as usual. Oct. 22, 1962, for the first time ever Kennedy raises the defense readiness status DEFCON from level 4 peacetime to 3 increased readiness. 22 interceptors are sent into the field. In the Atlantic, 59 crews have already been underway for 3.5 weeks. They feel more and more abandoned by Moscow. Radio operator Vadim Orlov will later describe the situation to Thomas Blanton of the U.S. National Security Archive as follows: since they were not getting any messages from Moscow, they were listening to what the radio stations were reporting from Miami. They heard reports on the radio of an imminent United States invasion of Cuba from the buildup of naval units off the coast. Reports of total mobilization. There was even speculation on the radio about possible enemy submarine activity in the region. But it is not only the lack of contact with Moscow that troubles them. Due to an accident in another boat the year before, their chances of being discovered have increased considerably. Aboard 19, one of the first Soviet nuclear submarines, a nuclear reactor, caught fire and 8 crew members died from the deadly radiation while trying to extinguish the fire. One of the crew members aboard 19, and witness to the accident, was Vasily Arkhipov. He had seen what the radiation did to people. He had seen with his own eyes how some of the people who were in the nuclear reactor were carried out. As a consequence of the 19 disaster, the Soviet Navy decommissioned its nuclear submarines. The only submarines available for this mission run on diesel engines, and to recharge their batteries they must surface. But for all their equipment shortcomings, all Soviet submarine captains still have an ace up their sleeve. They can make a 100-meter-long steel colossus simply disappear. The seas are made up of different layers with different water temperatures. These different layers break the speed of the sonar waves, so the submarines cannot be located. This phenomenon is called thermal stratification. A submarine that is below a thermal layer can be located only very difficult. A cool water layer has a different layer than a warmer water layer. That sonar signal bounces between the two, downright. Meanwhile, 85% of the entire Atlantic fleet is on the hunt for possible ships trying to circumvent Kennedy's blockade. Khrushchev's response to Kennedy's quarantine is if a Soviet ship is stopped and searched by the Americans, it will be considered an act of piracy. 40 destroyers, 4 aircraft carriers and 358 planes participate in the search for Soviet ships that can smuggle weapons. It is the most dangerous cat-and-mouse game in history. On October 24, the alert level of the Strategic Air Command Forces is raised to DEFCON 2. The last step before a possible nuclear war. The stay in the warmer waters of Sargasso Lake makes itself felt aboard the submarines. Conditions are deteriorating, air conditioning is failing and the temperature on board is rising. The temperature went up to 60 to 65 degrees, and in the engine room it was over 70 degrees, and not just for 5 to 10 minutes. The crew was at the mercy of these conditions for hours. The Soviet diesel engine fleet is geared for the freezing Arctic waters, for water temperatures of about 2 degrees. The temperature of the Sargasso Sea is around 30 degrees. The submarines overheat. The coolest areas of the submarine are the far ends by the torpedo bay. Here the temperature is only up to 40 to 45 degrees, and crew members are allowed to rest here briefly. Rations are reduced, and everyone gets only a single glass of water per day. A week after arriving in the Sargasso Sea, 59 has still not received any new orders from Moscow. The daily task is to hide from the American submarine fighters. With the reconnaissance planes overhead, 59's only option is to dive quickly. However, the charge of the batteries is only enough to hide for a maximum of 6 hours. The sailors aboard 59 don't know if their cover has been blown. In Washington, however, a success story is making the rounds. The submarine has been discovered. The United States fleet is trying to apprehend the boat discovered by the reconnaissance plane. Sonar buoys with omitted microphones are dropped. The water temperature is constantly measured, with the weather calming down. A calm smooth surface without thermal layers is formed on the Atlantic. The stealth of the Soviets no longer provides protection. The USS Coney continues to scour the waters. The American reconnaissance aircraft have detected the possible presence of 3 enemy submarines. What they don't know, however, is that their prey has enough nuclear weapons material to destroy the entire Atlantic fleet. The men of 59 persevere at 60 degrees, with little power left on board and hunted by the most powerful naval fleet in the world. Kennedy follows a protocol regarding the treatment of a discovered enemy submarine. Under no circumstances should it be attacked but rather forced to surface. Kennedy has a message drafted to the Soviets. In it he points out that the Americans are just in the process of getting one of the Soviet submarines to surface. What Kennedy does not know. Moscow has no contact with the submarines. Submarine hunters have sonar devices that can make very localized sounds. The sonar device is like a big loudspeaker that everybody has at home. It is like 5 strong men hitting a barrel. In Washington, The day is winding down. The crisis now consents to a cornered, unpredictable Soviet submarine. Nerves are on edge. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, Staff General Curtis LeMay, one of the founding fathers of the R&D Corporation, clashed massively with President John F. Kennedy and Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. He was strongly opposed to a naval blockade and instead called for a more aggressive posture toward the Soviet Union and Cuba, respectively. He argued that the United States should dare to fight a nuclear war against the Soviet Union while it could still win it. The United States at that time had 17 times as many nuclear weapons as the Soviet Union and had conducted 10 times as many nuclear tests. He therefore pressed vigorously for permission to bomb the Soviet missile bases just stationed in Cuba. LeMay himself expected to be able to destroy only 90% of the positions. After the crisis was averted, extensive military analysis showed that LeMay would have achieved a far lower hit rate in the event of a first strike against the missile bases. As a result, this type of escalation would likely have led to nuclear weapons use on the Soviet side as well. Even immediately after the end of the crisis and the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba, LeMay continued to advocate an invasion of the island. 59 has now been targeted by the United States for 2 hours. The Americans decide to move things along a bit. For a week without news from Moscow, the B-59 advisory does not know that the depth charges are only meant as a warning. The Americans dropped 55 practice depth charges to get them to surface. The Soviets have a special signal. 3 shell explosions means come up immediately. The United States has a different signal for immediate surfacing. The link with Moscow is completely broken. The slow torture of B-59 by the USS Kane lasts 5 hours. Sowiecki orders the special weapons to be made ready. He demands the key from Maslenikov. Temperatures of 60 degrees Celsius and no contact with home. A boat virtually without power, and to all appearances under fire. Sowiecki wants to sink the whole American fleet, because he does not want to disgrace Russia. Sowiecki was an impulsive man, but he was sure that he was doing the right thing at that moment. He demands the key from Maslenikov, although he has no authorization to do so. Because Vasily has the sick. He was the commander-in-chief of all the submarines in the fleet. Sowiecki was only the commander of this one submarine. But the commander comes right after God. Such are the rules in a submarine. Vasily knows that this is not an attack, and knows that they just want to make them surface. Now Vasily Arkhipov carries the fate of the world on his shoulders. Ivan Maslenikov was the captain of the boat, but Vasily was the commander of the fleet, so they needed his consent to activate the nuclear torpedo. 2 of them agreed, but Vasily refused to agree. And thus Vasily Arkhipov prevented the world from a nuclear war. The United States of America was ready to use nuclear weapons. Its planes were ready to fly armed with nuclear warheads towards Russia and drop nuclear bombs on key targets. Of the 4 Soviet submarines that had sailed a month earlier, only one was not detected. None of the others were close enough to fire on the Americans. For the returning Soviet submariners, there is only contempt. They are treated shabbily. One Soviet admiral is reported to have said to the commanders, It would have been better if they had gone down with their messengers. Vasily Arkhipov, who saved the world from nuclear war, probably succumbed to radioactive poisoning he had contracted during the 19 disaster. He became ill and died of kidney cancer. An end received by many who served with him on the submarine. How close the world really was to the brink of apocalypse became known only years later. In 2002, Vadim Orlov, the radio operator of 59, tells his story at a press conference.
663rd contact Sunday, 6th November 2016, 9:48 p.m.
But can I now ask you another time to find me an excerpt from a conversation from earlier times, but this time not from your father Sverhov, but from Asket and me? This is a conversation with a 40-year-old Russian naval officer with whom I was able to talk in his bunk in a Russian submarine in the 1960s, the translator being Asket. Vasily was the name of the man who was very frightened when Asket and I suddenly stood in his bunk in front of him. I remember that well as his fright when I told him what it was all about. But then he promised that he would do the right thing, after which he thanked Asket and me. The point was that he should refuse an order because your father Sverhov had explained to me that he had seen through a look at the future that a great threat was arising. Therefore, a warning is appropriate to prevent something. It was probably in 1950 that he initiated me into his foresight and said that I should also inform Asket and discuss with her what could be done to pass on a neutral warning.
I'm aware of what happened, so I know what you're talking about. And it's a good thing you're talking carefully about it. First of all, I know everything from my father's conversation recordings, and secondly from the 1962 conversation recordings of Asket. However, to talk about it openly in a conversation report would probably not be good, because you, together with Asket, have done something with my father's disclosure of his foresight, which was actually meant to be concealed, because you have prevented something that should not openly become known, because you would be attacked for it and maliciously accused of self-exaltation. It was probably my father's intention that you should seek a direct contact to make a warning, and then you would act as expected by him, but really should not be openly spoken about.
So let us not talk about what happened during the Cuban crisis. All right, that's fine. The whole thing just came to my mind again because of Trump, who wants to establish good relations with Russia and Putin again against the previous perfidious political US machinations, and the Clinton, which fortunately was rejected by the majority of the US population, albeit in ignorance of their criminal airs and graces, and therefore prevented another world war. Since the end of the Third World War in 1945, mankind has stood on the brink of another world war about 5 or 6 times, also as a result of misunderstandings.
Whereby several times only the common sense of courageous soldiers or officers could prevent the evil that would otherwise have led to an all-destructive nuclear war.
Will it be different this time? Or will again the reason and the understanding of single or several persons save the world from an immense disaster? It is written in the stars what will come, but one thing is sure: anyone who trusts and supports the most powerful government while it is engaged in massive propaganda for a dangerous proxy war that could destroy the entire world in a nuclear inferno should never again be allowed to sit at the adult table.